Hi guys. So the OPCW, the people who are checking this suspected chemical weapons attack in Syria, have not been able to access the chemical site according to the reports. Now this is important because they were supposed to be able to gain access to the site on April the 17th. By April the 18th, I suspected that they would have published some sort of report saying that there was no evidence of chemical weapons being used. The Russians have claimed that the chemical weapons attack was staged by the White Helmets, and the White Helmets are funded by various different Western organizations, and they're claiming that at least one of the children was tricked into taking part in the display that was shown in the media, while his father and other hungry participants were given dates, biscuits, and rice. Obviously, because there's a war going on over there, food, water is scarce and precious. It has a ring of truth to it. A situation like that, people would do whatever they need to do in order to feed themselves. Maybe taking part in a false flag. All we really see is dust and children covered in water, looking terrified. You're in a war environment, so terrified is already down. Pour some water on a child, make them look wet and afraid, and you have the potential for a false flag attack being broadcast across the Western world, well, across the world really, but really being hammered home in the Western society. On the flip side, the US is now saying that they have credible evidence that Russia is sanitizing the chemical site. So this is only reinforcing the theory that when the OPCW publish their report, it's going to have a finding of no chemical weapons usage. What does that mean for the retaliation from Russia, Iran, and Syria? Russia have already promised a retaliation, a response. During the attack that took place on Friday the 13th / Saturday the 14th, they pushed for more control of the Euphrates River, and they moved fighter jets to Iran, which is important and significant, and I'm going to explain why in a few moments. But as I was saying, it just reinforces this theory that they're going to find no use of chemical weapons. So I think once that report is published, that is when we'll see the response from Iran, Russia, Syria, and now Iraq, because Iraq have recently bombed ISIL in Syria, so they've involved themselves in the war. And the question for me is, if America, the USA, France, and various Western nations are fighting ISIL in Syria, and Russia, Iran, Syria itself, and Iraq are fighting ISIL in Syria as well, who is funding ISIL or ISIS or whatever you want to call them? Where is that money coming from? How are they getting food? How are they getting water? The government or the Western allies have control between them of the airfields, the oil fields, the dams, the borders, the infrastructure, pretty much everything that an invading army would need in order to survive. So what is really going on there? You've got two opposing forces fighting the same force, but somehow it's becoming a clash between the two. So it's really weird in that sense. And obviously, I feel like there's the unseen hand, the one that's pulling the puppet strings behind all of this, funding ISIS, and obviously generating this tension in the Middle East, or at least exacerbating it, as the tensions were already there. So it has to be considered strongly that an attack is going to be launched soon by Iran or by Israel. And I feel that that attack is going to be after whatever the OPCW finds. In my opinion, I think they're going to say they find nothing. And as I said, one thing that gives that more credibility is the fact that the US is saying that Russia is sanitizing the site, and Russia is saying there was no attack in the first place, it was all staged. That's all leading to one thing, a report of no chemical weapons usage. Now the UK, France, and the USA have an attack to answer for. Over here in the UK, you've got plenty of MPs and Parliament saying that the attack was illegal, but plenty of people also supporting Theresa May on the basis that chemical weapons were used. But if the OPCW finds that chemical weapons weren't used, those same people that are now supporting her will flip on her. But not only that, you've got to worry about what the response from the Russians, the Iranians, and the Syrians are going to be. And I have in mind pretty much what that response is going to be. So Israel signifies a direct warning to Iran with satellite images they published the other day. Basically, I already showed this report, but they were pointing out that they basically know where Iran is based in Syria, pointing out that they know that they're based at airfields and stuff, sending a threat, basically. You know, we know where you are, and if you attempt anything, we'll come after you. And this is because Israel is picking up chatter, and as I said, that they would pick up chatter that Iran is planning to attack them, and whether they would launch a preemptive attack first, or whether Iran would attack and then Israel will respond. That remains to be seen, but either of those two events is going to play out. So that only leads you on to the same day that Israel published those photographs, was the 70th anniversary of Israel and Iran's Army Day, and Iran paraded some new military equipment through the streets, and that's obviously a direct threat to Israel. Now, the thought on will Iran attack Israel over the fact that when Israel launched attacks on the T4 bases in Syria, they killed at least 7 IRG forces or Quad forces, and recently they had their funerals, and there's been responses from the top levels of the Iranian government saying that there will be a response. So I'm just going to quickly read this report. As the dust settles following last weekend's US, French, British attack on Syrian chemical weapons facilities, the countdown to the next round of military conflict between Israel and Iran has begun. Last week, Israel once again targeted the T4 base in Syria, which houses Iran drone forces, killing 7 Iranians and apparently destroying a drone infrastructure project. This is the same base from which an Iranian drone was launched in February, which the Israeli Air Force intercepted. Israel then hit the T4 base and Israeli aircraft downed by Syrian anti-aircraft. So there was a bit of a tit for tat there. Drone went into Israel. Israel shot it down, went on attacks on bases. The drone bases it came from, Syrian air defenses responded, shot down an F-16 fighter jet. More responses from Israel, which resulted in 7 Iranians killed, and that's basically where we're at now. So if you're thinking of it as a chess game, then Israel has just had the last move, and now we're waiting for Iran to make their next move. So an Iranian retaliatory strike against Israel is likely in the works. Where and how Tehran chooses to carry out its attack is still unclear, but for reasons that we describe below, it is most likely to be a rocket or missile attack launched from Syria. The choice will define what to expect for the future of Iran and Israeli confrontations. There are very clear signals that this time Iran would indeed retaliate. Iranian media gave extensive coverage to the Israeli attack on T4 last week. Iranian leaders, most notably Ali Akbar Veliati, the top advisor to Iran's supreme leader, issued direct threats of retaliation. Hezbollah's leader Hassan Nasrallah also warned Israel that this time there would be a steep price to pay. The highly publicized funerals of Quds forces personnel was the last such indication. Iran is now both deeply and publicly committed to retaliate. The stage is set. Iran is determined to cash in on its huge investment in Syria by improving its military presence and the means with which to pressure Israel. ultimately its aim is to firmly establish itself as a regional power. Meanwhile, Israel is determined not to repeat the mistake it made in Lebanon, watching from the sidelines as the Iranian threat from Hezbollah intensified. Israel has made clear its intention to combat the threat from the start while it remains manageable. In Israel's view, the time to act is ripe due to both geopolitical and strategic factors. First, Russia's desire to keep the situation in Syria relatively stable puts Israel in the unique position of acting as a potential disruptor. Israel thus has leverage over the larger and more powerful Russian state. Second, Israel's freedom to operate in Syria's skies may be limited in the future by improved Iranian or Syrian anti-aircraft capabilities or by an international accord. That probably won't happen because the US will veto any UN resolutions against Israel. Likewise, Russia will veto any UN resolutions against Syria, so there's no moving forward with the UN really. While the intentions are clear, there remains considerable debate over what form the retaliation would take. In the Middle East, these nuances matter. There are several possibilities and each carries a different prospect for an Israeli counter-response. A missile salvo appears to be the most appropriate Iranian response, both in terms of capabilities and risk calculation. However, the more crucial question is what target they will choose. A military target appears to be the more appropriate response, a quid pro quo attack, aiming to deal a lethal blow to the Israel Defense Force's reputation, or even better, the Israeli Air Force, since an F-16 fighter jet was downed in February, but a more effective deterrent may lie in targeting a big city, thereby eliciting a panic effect. Even if it is intercepted by Israeli defense systems, the goal from the Iranian perspective may be to create public pressure that in turn would work to alter Israel's risk calculation in Syria. On the downside, civilian centers are a less legitimate target and might put Iran in an uncomfortable position internationally, when such a spotlight is the last thing Iran needs as worldwide concern over Iran's intervention in the region crescendos. The second dilemma facing the Iranians is from where to launch the missiles, the options being Iran, Syria or Lebanon. Launching from Iran will naturally send a strong message to Israel, both in terms of capabilities and determination. The clear disadvantage of this choice would be the legitimization of an Israeli counter-response in Iran, and yet another unnecessary escalation for the time being from the Iranian perspective. I disagree. The prospect of Iran launching an attack directly from Iran has increased with the fact that Russian fighter jets and bombers are in Iran as of February the 13th / Saturday the 14th, when the US, UK and France attacked Syria, and under that fight, moves were made by Russia, including moving fighter jets and bombers to Iran. And as I've said before, if Iran decides to attack Israel and Israel decides to respond to Iran directly, then Russian fighter jets and bombers are there to respond directly to Israel. That would obviously then drag the US in terms of responding back to Russia. And it's a back and forth until more and more people are involved and the war escalates into something that can't be stopped. Lebanon is also well equipped with a variety of missiles in both range and size, and therefore a convenient location for the Iranians. However, an escalation in Lebanon is far more damaging for all parties involved. It has the possibility to ignite a war between Israel and Hezbollah and to harm crucial Hezbollah arsenals and infrastructure, serving neither Iran nor Hezbollah's interests. Hezbollah is not interested in war at the moment, as its leaders are preoccupied with solidifying its image as the protector ahead of Lebanon's parliamentary elections in May. The numerous casualties in Syria and the fact the group still has close to 7,000 troops on the ground there complicate this picture. Again, I have to disagree with the fact that Hezbollah is not interested in war at the moment. They are very interested in war at the moment, but the time is not right. Obviously, the 6-week return march still continues. Today, they're going to be resuming their marches at the border, and obviously, if there's an escalation in conflicts there, there'll be more people dying, and that only adds to the overall picture of that they're painting of Israel, that they need to be attacked. That's the message that they're sending out with all these media reports about Israel shooting children and journalists. Whether those reports are true or not, the messaging behind it is pretty clear, so that can't be ignored. The most sensible option remains Syria, the arena with the least risk for the Iranians and the relevant stage of the recent skirmishes. Yet there are two main challenges that remain to be mitigated: the delicate relationship with the Russians and the risk of further damaging Iranians' assets and capabilities in Syria in case Israel will be forced to respond. In order to avoid putting stress on the Russians, the Iranians would retaliate in a fashion the Russians would find tolerable and containable. Russia expressed its anger after the last Israeli attack and therefore will most likely tolerate some sort of measured Iranian response. The question is, what does Russia consider measured? Possibly anything that doesn't pose a substantial threat to stability in Syria and wouldn't provoke an Israeli escalated response. This appears to be an impossible equation to solve. Iran wants to buttress its deterrence capability after Israel proved willing to pay a steep price in order to prevent Iran from establishing another front in Syria. I think I'll stop there. So that basically just broke it all down to where this possible attack could come from, why there could be a possible attack, the reasoning behind it, and obviously those things have been pointed out in earlier videos, but time has moved on and events have transpired, but there's still one key issue that remains unresolved. Were there chemical weapons used in Syria? Yes or no? And from what I'm seeing, with the Russian claims that it was a false flag and no chemical weapons were used, and now the US reports of credible evidence that the Russians are scrubbing the chemical sites, it just leads to one conclusion. They're going to come up with a finding of no chemical weapons used. All I can really say about it is we have some more time to go, at least until we get this OPCW report, and then we'll see what comes from that. Again, I don't know what their report's going to say, but looking at what is coming out at the moment, the likely finding is there's no chemical weapons, and then that just leaves the door open for a justified retaliation. So have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and God bless.